Hey guys! Have you ever wondered why most people invariably associate luxury, exclusivity, diamonds, and big money when they hear the word Rolex? Who's behind this company? And what else is this brand famous for, besides Swiss watches? And do you think you can be surprised by what I'm about to tell you? The story of Rolex is inseparable from the history of watches itself. The first, so-called pocket watches, were large and uncomfortable, and simply didn't fit in a pocket, as they were often ball-shaped or egg-shaped, made of metal or wood, and most often people were forced to wear them around their necks. The problem with them is that dust, moisture, and sweat penetrated the watch case and corroded the watch from the inside. As for wristwatches, which were also invented in the 16th century, they were called bracelets or wristlets and were intended exclusively for women. Wristwatches were not very accurate and not very durable. It is not surprising that many men were skeptical about wristwatches until the middle of the 19th century, and not a single self-respecting man of that time would put a watch in his hand, preferring the watch pocket. Hans Wilsdorf, the founder of Rolex, was born on the 22nd of March in 1881 in Bavaria in a prosperous middle-class family. But Hans' childhood was not destined to be cloudless and happy. Anna Wilsdorf, the mother of 3 children, passed away early, and soon this loss was followed by the death of their father. So at the age of 12, Hans, along with his brother and younger sister, was completely orphans. The fate of the 3 children was placed in the hands of their maternal relatives. Our uncles were not indifferent to our fate. However, the way they taught me self-reliance very early on made me develop the habit of taking care of my possessions, and looking back, I believe that this is largely due to my success. We were placed in a boarding school with an excellent reputation, where we received a good education, which is so necessary for a man who must make his way in the world. After graduating from boarding school, Hans continued his studies at a business school in Bayreuth, before leaving Bavaria and going to Geneva in Switzerland, and starting his career as an assistant in a pearl exporting firm. Working with pearls, he studied the business and made an important discovery for himself that the company didn't create anything, but despite this, it received a large profit because it was simply repackaging pearls from suppliers to the jewelers. This realization was a great lesson for young Hans. In 1900, Hans got a job at the Kuehne Watch Company. He was hired because he could easily read and write in English, German, and French. These skills were necessary for conducting business correspondence with the British Empire and America. Hans got a great opportunity to closely study the watch industry and every type of watch produced in Switzerland and abroad. While working for this company, Hans was also responsible for winding several hundred watches every day and monitoring their accuracy. It was probably here that he became obsessed with the idea of creating the perfect watch, which formed the basis of the future Rolex. Later, Hans moved to London, where he met his first wife, Florence Frances May Wilsdorf Crotty, and soon became a British citizen. In 1905, at the age of 24, with a small amount of money, Hans Wilsdorf, in partnership with his sister Anna's husband, Alfred James Davis, decided to start his own business. Together, they founded Wilsdorf and Davis Company in 1905, located at 83 Hutton Gardens in London. The company aimed to produce high-quality watches at affordable prices. On the very first day, Hans placed an unusual order with Hermann Agler. He ordered not regular, but actually smaller-sized debouche, which are the main parts of the movement, such as plates and bridges of the mechanism, as well as the mainspring housing. He wanted to produce wristwatches because he knew that they were the future. On the 2nd of July in 1908, the starman Hans Wilsdorf officially registered the name Rolex as a trademark for Wilsdorf and Davis Limited, because Hans was well aware that if he didn't manage to make his watches known under their name, the company's prospects in the future would be very limited. According to the official version, which the founder himself told everyone on the 50th anniversary of Rolex in 1958, the story of how he first came up with the name Rolex sounds a little mystical. I tried to combine the letters of alphabet in every possible way. As a result, several hundred names were born, but none of them seemed suitable to me. One morning, as I was sitting on the top floor of a carriage, driving through Cheapside, London, a kind genie whispered in my ear, "Rolex." In 1912, Hans Wilsdorf wrote a letter to Hermann Egler, asking him to make a watch that could compete with the accuracy of the marine chronometers. Egler accepted the challenge, and 2 years later, Rolex received the first Cavita certificate. On the 15th of July 1914, the Kew Observatory in England carried out tests identical to those of marine chronometers, testing a sample for 45 days in 5 different positions at 3 different temperatures, and awarded the 25mm Rolex wristwatch the first Class A accuracy certificate. It was a real success. The company's business was going uphill, but 10 years after Hans moved to England, the First World War began. Soon the British government imposed a 33% customs duty, and Hans decided to move and relocate his Rolex headquarters from London to Bienne and later to Geneva. That time, in 1915, Hans Wilsdorf foresaw the success of his enterprise and declared, "My personal opinion is that pocket watches will almost completely disappear, and they will finally be replaced by wristwatches. I am not mistaken in this, and you will see that I am right." Strange as it may seem, the war played a paradoxical role in this as well. Pocket watches, and then wristwatches, became indispensable companions of soldiers in the First World War. The problem with pocket watches at the front was that a fighting soldier, to compare his pocket watch and know the time of events, had to carefully put down his rifle, take off his gloves with trembling hands, unbutton his overcoat, and reach into his pocket. And after that, he very quickly had to do the same in reverse order. Often this process was so traumatic that by the time the soldier changed and took aim with his rifle, he had already forgotten what time it was. This process was inconvenient and time-consuming. With the wristwatch, the same soldier, aiming a rifle, could simply turn his wrist 180 degrees and look at his watch, even if he was wearing gloves. So the military was the first to appreciate the convenience of such a once ladies' watch configuration. It turns out that the modern wristwatch, which we take for granted today, began its life as a professional timekeeping tool during wartime. Rolex sales were growing. People wanted to have not one watch bracelet, but several. Even men over time wanted to have a choice of models suitable for different occasions. And toilets. For example, a pair for work and other for personal life. From the very first days, I constantly repeated to my technical assistants, "We must succeed in making watch cases so dense that our movements are constantly protected from damage caused by dust, sweat, weather, heat, and cold. Only then will a Rolex watch be perfectly accurate." In July 1926, the development of sealed watch was completed, a patent was obtained, and the first watch, which was called the Rolex Oyster, with protection against air, dust, and moisture, was presented to the general public. The main task was to convey to people that this model is waterproof, so advertising campaigns were full of references to mermaids, and the watches themselves were displayed in aquariums with plants and goldfish. This brilliant idea, of course, was a breakthrough in advertising art, which attracted the attention of the public. Have you ever heard about Mercedes Gleitzer? The first woman to swim across the English Channel. Once Hans Wilsdorf heard about her rehab swim, to prove that she actually could swim across La Manche for the second time. He contacted Mercedes Gleitzer and invited her to become a Rolex spokesperson who would support the brand by wearing a Rolex Oyster around her neck during her second cross-channel rehab swim. Although Mercedes couldn't complete her challenge in full because she almost froze to death, the watch was recovered from the water in perfect condition. This was such a huge success for Rolex Oyster. Hans Wilsdorf was very pleased with this collaboration and proclaimed Mercedes the first celebrity to support Rolex. Rolex soon introduced the revolutionary perpetual movement, perpetual, which can still be found in any automatic watch. The development was based on the perpetual rotor system, invented by Abraham Louis Pirelli in 1770. Hans Wilsdorf patented the perpetual mechanism in 1931. This model was designed so that the winding mechanism of the watch didn't require the daily intervention of the owner. Even the slightest movement of the wrist could wind up the watch, thereby maintaining the spring at optimal tension. In general, the invention of automatically controlled wristwatches that could wind themselves was a centuries-old dream of the watch world. Over the centuries, many famous watchmakers have tried to improve automatic or self-winding watches, but none of them have been successful. Until World War II, Rolex led the way in increasing market share, thanks to patents for the waterproof case and the automatic perpetual movement. But the Second World War seriously hindered the progress of Rolex, as it was difficult for the company to ship its products and components to and from neutral Switzerland. The war brought pain and destruction to every family. Grief also touched Hans Wilsdorf. Unfortunately, Hans' first wife, Florence Frances May Wilsdorf-Crotty, died of illness on the 26th of April in 1944 in London. Hans Wilsdorf was completely devastated by the loss of his beloved wife, and to drown out his grief, he plunged into work, turned all his attention to Rolex. In 1946, Rolex released its 50,000th officially certified Swiss chronometer. After this release, Rolex began an ambitious progress, setting a simply furious speed of production. For comparison, we know that it took about 40 years to produce the first 50,000 Rolex watches, and only a year to produce the same amount. Do you know what else made Rolex stand out among its rivals? There is a legend that Hans Wilsdorf was known for his pedantry. The morning toilet took up a lot of his time. One day, while he was washing his hands, a drop of water fell on the glass of his datejust, and it dawned on him. Later, Rolex watchmakers made a special glass with magnifying lens above the date window, so it was more clear. The Eye of the Cyclops was introduced in 1953, and a year later the company applied for this technological innovation with the Swiss Patent Office. But Hans Wilsdorf was convinced that his fantastic idea could be used by competitors, and for safety reasons, in 1955 he nevertheless published a press release stating, "To all watchmakers, we draw your attention to the fact that glass with a special magnifying lens patented by Rolex and may only be used by Rolex. The invention is under legal protection in Switzerland and abroad. We will not hesitate to take legal action against any forgery." So Wilsdorf made it clear to competitors not to even try to imitate his idea. In the history of Rolex, I was amazed by the company's ambassadors. This is rare, so I can't help but share it. Let me know in the comments to this video which one impressed you the most. The first ambassador was Mercedes Gleitzer, who swam across La Manche in 1927. British racing driver and journalist Sir Malcolm Campbell set the world land speed record in 1935. Charles Ilwood Eiger flew faster than the speed of sound and wore a Rolex wristwatch in 1947. Climbers Tenzing Norgay and Sir Edmund Hillary conquered Everest with a Rolex in 1953. Purely an amazing marketing move, and the choice of the company's ambassadors. The creation of Hans Wilsdorf is alive, and his ideas continue to be realized, even though he died more than half a century ago, on the 6th of June in 1960 in Geneva. And the most amazing thing is that more than 60 years after his departure, the company continues to operate as if he still manages it. Why is this happening? Well, the answer to this question might surprise you, but Rolex is in fact a charitable organization. Yes. As you remember, back in 1944, after the death of his first wife, May Wilsdorf-Crotty, Hans Wilsdorf founded his foundation, the Hans Wilsdorf Trust, to support charitable and scientific projects around the world. Rolex is 100% owned by the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation. The property and shares of the company were placed under the management of the foundation by Hans Wilsdorf, along with strict instructions on how to handle all profits and finances. The Rolex company was the only business of Hans Wilsdorf's life, and Hans didn't have any children. So the purpose of transferring all funds to the management of the fund was to ensure the stability of the company. Even today, Rolex has no owners or shareholders. The management of the company keeps and distributes profits and can reinvest and send funds to charity. Among the projects supported by the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation are projects to combat diseases such as cancer and cardiovascular diseases, projects in development of new drugs and medical technologies, as well as projects related to the protection of the environment around the world. It turns out that by buying a Rolex watch, you make a huge charitable contribution to the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, which distributes the profits received from sales to good causes. By purchasing a Rolex watch, you are paying for a history that had passed through the centuries, for the crazy idea for eternal watches, which took Hans Wilsdorf many years to implement. Keep up learning, guys. Success is just the number of attempts.